The one-way glass of my private office was a cinema screen, and I was watching the premiere of my life's greatest tragedy. Down below, my wife Eleanor laughed. It was a sound I once cherished. Now it was a dagger twisting in my gut. She was attending a cooking class at the Gilded Spoon, my flagship restaurant. "A gift," she'd said. Chef Julian corrected her grip on the knife, his hand lingering on hers for a beat too long. A stolen glance. A subtle smirk. In my restaurant. With my wife. They thought they were being discreet. Two lovers hiding in plain sight. They had no idea the man they were betraying was watching their every move from 20 feet above. The show was just beginning. Eleanor and I had been married for 15 years. I built the Gilded Spoon from a single struggling diner into a culinary empire, brick by painful brick. For Tress, I'd always told myself, she was the reason I pushed through the grueling 18-hour days and sleepless nights. My partner, my rock. And Julian was my protege. I found him 5 years ago, a fiery talent drowning in a third-rate bistro. I saw his potential, mentored him, and handed him the keys to my flagship kitchen. He owed me everything. His Michelin star ambitions, his reputation, his six-figure salary. He repaid that debt by putting his hands on my wife. They saw me as a quiet, aging businessman, too absorbed in spreadsheets to notice the serpent in my own garden. They saw a fool. They mistook my silence for weakness, my patience for ignorance. They forgot one crucial detail about the man they were betraying. I built the garden. And I know exactly where all the bodies are buried. Tonight, I was just deciding where to dig 2 new graves. Metaphorically speaking, of course. The menu for my revenge was being finalized. This whole charade, this cooking class, it wasn't even her idea, it was mine. A pathetic, last-ditch attempt to bridge a canyon that had been forming between us for years. The Gilded Spoon, my greatest triumph, had become my greatest rival for Eleanor's attention. I'd spend late nights poring over profit margins and expansion plans, and I'd come home to a cold bed and a wife who looked at me with polite indifference. Our conversations became logistical updates about bills and social calendars. The warmth had vanished, replaced by a quiet, sterile chill. I thought if she could just see the world I'd built, feel the passion in it, she might see Tram Allégre again. So a few weeks ago, over a silent dinner, I said, "You should take a class at the Spoon. Julian's an artist. You'd love it." I remember the way her eyes lit up for the first time in months. I mistook it for interest in my world. The bitter truth is, she was just excited to get closer to his. I brought Julian into our home. He'd join us for dinners after a successful service, a bottle of expensive wine in hand, regaling us with stories from the kitchen. I saw him as the son I never had, the heir to my culinary throne. I'd watch as he and Eleanor discussed flavor profiles and wine pairings with a fervor she and I hadn't shared in a decade. I saw it as two people appreciating a common interest. I was a fool. I was the host of the party, completely oblivious that the guests of honor were planning to burn my house down. There were signs, of course. Little breadcrumbs leading to this exact moment, the way she started dressing up just to drop by the restaurant, her sudden, expert knowledge of the staff roster, the lingering scent of his specific pretentious cologne on her scarf one evening. "I was helping him with the new wine list," she'd said, her voice smooth as silk. I believed her. I wanted to believe her. Because the alternative was a truth too devastating to face. They didn't just start an affair. They built it on the foundation of my trust. They used my generosity as their meeting place and my mentorship as their cover story. They weaponized my love for her and my faith in him against me. I didn't just give them the opportunity. I hand-delivered it on a silver platter, gift-wrapped with a bow. And as I watched them now, laughing over a perfectly seared scallop, I realized the first course of my revenge has already been served. They're eating it right now. They just don't know it's poison. The poison wasn't in the scallops she was so happily devouring. The poison was certainty, and I'd been living with a lethal dose for exactly 23 days. It began with the cologne on her scarf, a scent I knew intimately, Julian's signature blend of sandalwood and arrogance. I was helping him with the new wine list in the cellar. She'd lied, her voice a little too bright, her eyes focused on her phone. A plausible lie, expertly delivered. But she didn't know the wine shipment had been delayed by a storm. The cellar had been locked. Julian had left the restaurant hours before she claimed to have met him. That single frayed thread was all I needed to pull. I didn't hire a private investigator. The thought of a stranger looking into my failure was unbearable. I didn't need one. The gilded spoon is my kingdom, and the king sees everything. My head of security, Marcus, a man whose loyalty I'd bought with a mortgage and his son's college tuition years ago, gave me what I asked for without a single question: full, unedited access to every camera feed in the building. Not the sanitized public loops, but the raw footage from the prep kitchens, the loading docks, the dry storage, the wine cellar. For 2 nights I sat in this very office, the hum of the servers my only company, fueled by black coffee that tasted like ash. I watched hundreds of hours of mundane activity, my heart a cold, heavy stone in my chest. I watched them steal glances across a hot pass-through. I saw him slip a folded note into her purse by the host's stand. I was about to give up, to dismiss it all as paranoia, when I found it. The wine cellar. Time-stamped 2:17 a.m., a week and a half prior. They were supposed to be finalizing inventory. Instead, he had her pressed against the racks of Chateau Margaux, my private collection. The grainy, silent footage screamed a confession louder than any words ever could. I watched the man I had mentored kiss the woman I had built my world for, and something inside me broke. Or perhaps, something was finally forged. In that moment, the grief evaporated. It was cauterized by a rage so pure and focused it felt like clarity. The heartbroken husband was gone, replaced by the businessman. A problem had been identified. A hostile takeover of my personal life. And hostile takeovers require a decisive, ruthless response. The next morning, I watched Eleanor across the breakfast table, a faint, secret smile playing on her lips as she texted under the table. She was a stranger, and so I smiled back, a perfect, hollow imitation of affection. "You know," I began, my voice even. "You should really take that masterclass with Julian, my treat." Her eyes lit up, a greedy, triumphant spark I now recognized. She thought it was a gesture of reconciliation, a sign of my continued, blissful ignorance. She didn't realize it was the first deliberate move in a game she didn't even know she was playing. I needed them here, together, comfortable in their deception. I needed to watch them perform on the stage, one built, under the lights I controlled. Because the first step in dismantling a conspiracy is to gather the traitors in one room. My revenge would be a 5-course meal, and this little class, this was just the amuse-bouche. The class ended. Laughter and the clinking of glasses drifted up to my office as the participants sampled their creations. Showtime. I straightened my tie, smoothed my jacket, and composed my face into a mask of benign curiosity. I descended the spiral staircase, my footsteps silent on the marble. They were standing close together by the stainless steel prep station, sharing a plate, their heads nearly touching as Julian pointed out something on her dish. They looked so comfortable, so natural. The sight sent a fresh wave of ice through my veins. "Looks like a success," I said, my voice calm and even. They sprang apart. Eleanor's smile was a little too wide, a little too bright. "Arthur, I didn't know you were here." "I'm always here," I replied gently, letting the double meaning hang in the air for a moment before turning to Julian. "Exceptional work, chef. You have a real gift for teaching." I was complimenting the predator on the elegance of his trap. Julian puffed out his chest, the picture of professional pride. "Eleanor's a natural, a pleasure to have in the kitchen." The condescension was subtle, but I heard it. He was telling me my wife belonged here, with him. "I can see that," I said, my eyes meeting Eleanor's. "You seem inspired." "It was wonderful," she gushed, her relief palpable. She thought she'd passed the test. "I finally understand the passion you've always talked about." "Good," I clapped Julian on the shoulder, a gesture of camaraderie that felt like branding him. Because that gives me an idea. Anton Dubois, the critic from the Chronicle, is in town next Friday. I've just managed to book him for a private tasting. A career-making dinner, Julian. Your chance to finally get that second Michelin star. Julian's eyes widened, his raw ambition instantly eclipsing everything else. This was the bait he could never resist. I want a 6-course menu, I continued, my tone shifting to that of a CEO outlining a critical project. Your most innovative work, no expense spared. I then turned my gaze to Eleanor, a warm, husbandly smile fixed on my face. And I want you there, darling, as my co-host. After today, your insights will be invaluable. I watched the silent, triumphant exchange of glances between them. They thought they had won. They thought this was their victory lap, a private celebration right under the fool's nose. They couldn't see the truth. This wasn't an invitation to a dinner, it was a summons. The main course of my revenge was about to be served, and they were both on the menu. The week leading up to the dinner was a symphony of deception, and I was its conductor. The gilded spoon buzzed with a manufactured energy. Julian, high on the fumes of his own ambition, walked the kitchen like a conquering general. He saw a second Michelin star glittering on the horizon. I saw a tombstone. Our first menu meeting was in my office. I had the blueprints for the new Miami expansion spread across the table, a deliberate prop. I wanted them to see me as the distracted businessman, my eyes on a distant prize, not on the vipers in my own nest. A 6-course tasting menu, Julian declared, sliding a piece of paper across the table. A journey, a narrative of flavor. He was so full of himself he was practically glowing. I scanned the list. Oysters with champagne foam, seared foie gras with a fig reduction. It was technically brilliant but soulless. Predictable. I needed him to overreach. To be reckless. It's good, Julian. Safe, I said, letting the word, safe, hang in the air like an insult. But Anton Dubois isn't looking for good. He's looking for God on a plate. This is your shot. The budget is unlimited. I want you to burn the boats. His eyes narrowed. I had pricked his ego exactly as I'd intended. Eleanor, sitting beside him, placed a perfectly manicured hand on his arm. He's right, Julian. You need to be bold. The gesture was proprietary. A queen encouraging her champion. I was thinking, I continued, feigning a sudden inspiration, about that bluefin akami I saw at auction, the one they call the Crimson Tear, impossibly rare. Julian's eyes lit up with a feverish greed. That fish costs more than a mid-range sedan, Arthur. And a second star is worth more than a fleet of them, I countered smoothly. My usual purveyor can't get it, but I have a contact, a new outfit, Artisan Provisions. They specialize in the impossible. It'll be costly. You'll have to sign a personal guarantee for the invoice, just for their insurance. The company will reimburse you after the dinner, of course. A formality. He didn't hesitate for a second. Done. He was signing his own death warrant, and he thought it was a promotion. Artisan Provisions was a shell company I'd set up 3 days ago. The invoice would be paid directly to me. Next, I turned to Eleanor. And the wine. This is where we need you, darling. Julian is the artist, but you're the poet. I want you two to have unrestricted access to the cellar. Don't just find pairings, find soulmates for his dishes. Her smile was dazzling. She thought I was finally appreciating her, giving her a seat at the table. In reality, I was just locking her in the cage with the other animal. I wanted them together. I wanted them comfortable. I needed more footage for the grand finale. Over the next few days, I let them run wild. They spent hours in the cellar, their laughter echoing up the stairwell. Marcus, my head of security, would send me a discreet text message, and I'd watch the live feed from my phone while sitting in a board meeting, my face a mask of corporate calm. I watched them taste wine, their heads close together. I watched him trace the line of her neck with his finger. I watched them steal a kiss behind a rack of priceless Bordeaux. Each frame of footage was another nail for their coffins. 2 days before the dinner, I forwarded an email to Julian. It was from a Genevieve, Anton Dubois' fictitious personal assistant. The language was meticulously crafted, full of industry jargon and polite, but firm demands. It confirmed the reservation time and included a crucial, final sentence. A small reminder: Mr. Dubois has a rather severe, though non-anaphylactic allergy to alliums in their raw or semi-cooked state. Specifically, garlic and shallots. Cooked is fine, but any trace of rawness causes him extreme gastric distress and, frankly, ruins his palate for the evening. Julian called me, his voice tight with panic. "Arthur, the base for half my sauces uses a raw shallot infusion. It's my signature." "Then you'll have to create a new one, won't you?" I said, my voice a placid sea of support. "A genius like you? This isn't a problem, it's an opportunity to innovate." "Don't worry, chef, you've got this." I hung up the phone and smiled. I had just handed him a grenade and convinced him it was the key to the city. He would spend the next 48 hours frantically reworking his entire menu, exhausting himself and his staff, terrorizing my kitchen with his stress-induced tirades. All to please a man who didn't exist. The night of the dinner arrived. The Gilded Spoon was closed to the public, an island of quiet anticipation. The single table in the center of the dining room was set for 3, a spotlight waiting for its actors. I found Eleanor in our bedroom, fastening a diamond necklace. She looked radiant, beautiful, a complete and utter stranger. "You look breathtaking," I said, and for a half-second, the old ache of what I'd lost returned. I crushed it. "Tonight is a big night," she said, turning to face me. Her eyes were shining with a triumphant light. She thought this was the beginning of her new life, a life of glamour and importance at the center of the culinary world, with Julian as her king and me as the benevolent, clueless banker. "The biggest," I agreed. Downstairs, Julian was a storm of nervous energy, pacing by the kitchen pass. He looked at me, his chef's whites immaculate, his face pale with stress. "Everything is perfect, Arthur, everything." "I have no doubt," I said, clapping him on the shoulder one last time. "She's on her way." I gestured to the maitre d', who nodded gravely. He was referring to Genevieve, the critic's assistant, who was scheduled to arrive first to inspect the table. Of course, Genevieve was an actress I'd hired for the evening. Julian and Eleanor exchanged a final, secret smile of victory. The curtain was rising. They had no idea they weren't the audience. They were the sacrifice. The actress I'd hired arrived precisely at 7. She was perfect. Her posture was rigid, her suit was severe, and she carried an air of professional condescension that could curdle cream. She introduced herself as Genevieve Martin, and her handshake was like a brief, cold shock. She surveyed the single, perfectly lit table. "Mr. Dubois prefers a west-facing view." "Is this west?" she asked, not waiting for an answer. She swept past me and Eleanor into the kitchen, where Julian stood waiting like a defendant before sentencing. "Chef," she said, her voice crisp, "Mr. Dubois has heard tales of your ambition. He expects to be surprised." She ran a finger along a countertop, checked it for dust, and found none. It didn't matter. Her expression of faint disapproval had already done its job. Julian's jaw tightened. "He will be," Julian managed, his voice strained. Genevieve gave a thin, unconvinced smile and returned to the dining room. "I will await his arrival." We took our seats. Eleanor was practically vibrating with excitement, her hand resting on my arm in a show of wifely support that now felt grotesque. Julian, having retreated to the kitchen, sent out the first course. The crimson tear. It sat in the center of 3 pristine white plates, a sliver of ruby-red fish shimmering under the spotlight. It looked like a drop of blood on snow. Julian emerged from the kitchen to present it himself, his panic replaced by a fragile, performative arrogance. He explained the fish's provenance, the complex citrus and salt cure, the delicate smoke he'd infused it with. He was a poet reciting an ode to his own brilliance. Incredible, chef, I said, lifting my fork. I looked at Eleanor. Taste that, darling. That's the taste of a man who takes exactly what he wants. Her eyes met Julian's over the table, a flicker of shared, secret triumph. It's divine, she breathed. As Julian lifted his own fork, Genevieve's phone rang. A shrill, prearranged tone that cut through the silence. She answered, her face a mask of professional concern. Yes, she said. A pause. Her eyes widened slightly. Oh my God! Is he all right? Another pause, longer this time. Julian's fork was frozen halfway to his mouth. I understand. Yes, of course. His health is what's most important. I'll inform the chef. She hung up and placed the phone on the table with a soft, funereal click. She looked at Julian, her expression a careful blend of pity and dismissal. There's been an incident, she announced. A minor car accident. Mr. Dubois is unharmed, but he won't be dining tonight, or any night this week. He sends his deepest apologies. The air went out of the room. Julian's face, which had been flushed with pride, turned the color of ash. I watched the ambition in his eyes curdle into pure, unadulterated panic. He stared at the $70,000 piece of fish on his plate, a fish he was now personally liable for, a fish for a ghost. Such a shame, I said into the crushing silence. I took a deliberate, slow bite of the akami. It tasted like victory. All that effort, all that expense. My gaze flicked from Julian's terrified face to Eleanor's, whose triumphant smile had collapsed into confusion. She put her hand on my arm again. Arthur, don't worry, we can reschedule. There's nothing to reschedule, I said, my voice dropping to its normal register. No warmth, no pretense. Just cold, flat steel. On the far wall, a piece of modern art, a large black canvas, flickered to life. It wasn't a canvas, it was a screen. Eleanor and Julian stared at it, uncomprehending. The evening isn't a total loss, I said, placing my napkin on the table. I've prepared a different kind of entertainment. A short film, you might say. The screen resolved into a grainy, silent image. The wine cellar. My wine cellar. Julian was there, his back to the camera. He turned and pulled Eleanor into the frame. She was laughing. He pressed her against the racks of Chateau Margaux, my private collection. He kissed her. Eleanor made a small, strangled sound. Julian looked like he'd been shot. The color drained from his face, leaving a waxy, horrified mask. The footage kept rolling. A silent, damning narrative of every stolen moment within my walls. The note passed at the host's stand. The lingering touch in the prep kitchen. The kiss. That long, damning kiss. All of it, intercut with close-ups of their faces, now pale and stricken in the dim light of the dining room. I let the video play in the dead silence for a full minute. I didn't need to say a word. The king doesn't need to shout when the executioner is already sharpening the axe. The main course had just been served. The silent kiss looped on the screen, a grainy, repeating monument to their betrayal. I let it play one more time before clicking the remote, plunging the room back into a thick, ringing silence. Julian looked like a man watching his own ghost. Eleanor was frozen, her hand covering her mouth, her eyes wide with the horror of discovery. The mistake you both made, I began, my voice calm, almost educational, was in your assessment of me. You saw the quiet businessman, the provider, and you mistook that for the whole man. You forgot who built the stage you're performing on. I turned my chair slightly to face Julian. That $70,000 fish you personally guaranteed? Artisan Provisions, the company on the invoice, sends its regards. It's one of my holding companies. The debt is yours, payable to me. Consider it a fee for this very expensive life lesson. I let that hang in the air. You're fired, Julian. Effective immediately. But I'm not just firing you, I'm erasing you. By morning, every Michelin-starred restaurant in the country will know your name, and why you'll never set foot in their kitchen. You traded your entire future for a stolen kiss in my wine cellar. Bad deal. He just stared, utterly broken. Then, I turned to Eleanor. The tears were finally falling, silent tracks on her perfect makeup. "You wanted passion," I said, my voice devoid of any warmth. "You wanted to feel alive, to be part of the glamorous world I built. Well, congratulations, you're finally at the center of it. This is the real business, Eleanor. Not menu tastings and flattering reviews. It's assets and liabilities. And you have become a liability." I rose from my chair and placed a thick manila envelope on the table next to her untouched plate. "These are the divorce papers, already signed. My lawyers will handle the rest." I walked toward the exit without looking back, leaving them in the spotlight. They were no longer my problem. They were just a bad investment I was finally liquidating. I have the power to fire the chef and ban them both from my restaurant. Should I do it publicly during their next class, or is there a smarter way to handle this? Let me know what you think in the comments.